Ah, hola Maya,
Hola, buenas tardes, ¿qué tal?
¿qué tal? Muy bien, ¿y tú?
Bien, gracias.
Bien,
Sí,
perfecto.
¿qué tal estáis? ¿Qué tal lo lleváis el congreso?
Sí, pues lo llevamos muy bien, la verdad. Ahora yo aquí en Alemania y los demás en Madrid, un poco en todas partes, pero muy bien. Yo creo que está saliendo bien. Maya, quería aprovechar, como tenemos unos minutillos, ¿quieres probar a ver si consigues compartir la pantalla para solo para que te quedes tranquila?
Sí, sí, quiero compartir para que se vea. Entonces le doy a compartir, ¿no? Y a ver, le doy
Sí.
a yo lo que quiero compartir son dos páginas web. Una página web, ¿cómo lo hago? ¿En desktop? Quizás. Me sale.
Eh, pues sí, pues no sabría.
Sí, le voy a dar a desktop a ver qué
Sí,
pasa. Yo creo
sí.
que sí. A ver, sí, para que acceda a mi pantalla. Vale, le he dicho que sí. Entonces, a ver, sí, sí, parece que sí. A ver. No puedo grabar los contenidos de pantalla hasta que salgas de la app. A ver. El candado. Estoy haciendo con un Mac. Vale. A ver si me deja.
Muy bien.
Entonces, ahora estoy viendo mi pantalla, claro.
Sí, 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 sí.
Entonces, los que voy a mostrar. Es que me sale arriba una cosita, pero bueno, que molesta un poquito. Voy a quitar esto. A ver, un momento. Sí, sale una cosita arriba que es un poco como un poquito molesta porque no puedo ver lo que necesito ver. Mm, no sé, pero vamos a ver, tiene que haber la forma de... Es que justo donde necesito escribir, me lo tapa
Te
la...
bloquea.
¿Sabes? Pero bueno, yo creo que sí, que de alguna manera tiene que funcionar esto. A ver. Es que justo me tapa donde lo puedo escribir o donde lo puedo clicar. Entonces, a ver qué bien que lo estoy probando ahora para ver si me deja de alguna manera minimizar eso que sale arriba.
Mm.
Es que sale arriba justo donde necesito escribir o mostrar. Es que así ahora mismo no puedo. A ver, ahora se ha quitado. Vale, pues lo voy a dejar preparado. Mm,
Pero de todas formas tienes
I am
un
studying
PowerPoint,
a
¿no?
game about truth.
Perdona,
I
dime.
will present you a set of questions to
Sí,
answer with
eso es lo
yes
que
or no.
quería.
Are you ready to play?
Esto es lo que quería mostrar. Dime,
Ah,
dime,
ok.
perdona.
Vale,
Dime.
vale. No, 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 que tienes de
I
todas
am
formas.
studying a
Ah,
game
eso,
about
vale, genial.
truth. I
Perdón.
will present you a
Lo
set of
siento, que es que está
questions
hablando
to
esa
answer
máquina.
with yes or no. Are
Perdona.
you ready to play?
Dime, Antonella, espera, voy a quitar
No,
esto
no.
ahora, ¿vale?
He visto tu
I am
pantalla y he visto que tienes tu presentación, con lo cual, perfecto. Te- Uy. No te oigo. A ver.
Audio compartido, vale. Ahora sí me oyes, ahora sí. Hola, hola.
Vale.
Sí, me he salido sin querer porque es la
Vale.
primera vez que uso Zoom. Entonces, pues, vale, veo que se sale abajo el vídeo y entonces lo de compartir, entonces es,
Abajo tienes una flecha que pone compartir pantalla. Eso,
vale, ahora
perfecto.
sí, lo estáis viendo.
Sí.
Entonces, es que me pasa lo mismo que antes, que no puedo, o sea, no puedo escribir, no puedo, es que no sé por qué sale esto, que es un poco problemático, porque claro, me va a salir cuando esté dando la conferencia. Mira, lo que me sale para ver si me puedes ayudar, me sale arriba, justo donde sale el espacio para escribir el URL,
Sí.
vale, pero ya me ha desaparecido. Vale, es que me aparece una franja en la que aparece todas las opciones, salir de la reunión, micrófono, aparecen todas justo donde quiero escribir o donde quiero mostrar.
Esto a lo mejor te metes encima y lo subes. Yo creo que es así de fácil para que no te moleste y que no esté donde tú tienes que escribir.
Pongo
¿Sí?
la flecha encima y desaparece, ¿no? Mm.
Yo creo que lo pones la flecha y lo subes, ¿sabes? Como cuando mueves un documento.
Ah, lo agarro.
Sí, yo creo que sí. Yo creo que es,
Ah,
sí,
bueno, es verdad, lo puedo agarrar hacia abajo. Sí,
¿eh?
vale.
Mejor.
Sí, mejor, gracias. Vale, pues sí. Vale, pues esta es una, la que voy a mostrar.
Tengo una
Y
pregunta, Maya.
dime,
¿Tú conoces a Víctor Huertas, que va a moderar?
personalmente no.
No, vale, vale, era para saber si le querías introducir tú o presentar tú, pero a lo mejor te lo pido
No,
a
no,
Juan
pero
Antonio.
puedo buscar información sobre él y
No,
le
no,
puedo...
no, tengo yo, te puedo mandar un documento, pero sí era solo por si le conocías también personalmente o si no se lo pido a Juan Antonio.
Pero yo sé que está, si no me equivoco, sí, está en SIM, o sea, está en el mismo proyecto de investigación, el mismo grupo, perdón, el mismo
Sí,
grupo de
sí,
investigación que yo, en el
sí,
grupo SIM, y imagino que también estará en el proyecto Aglaya, como
sí,
yo.
claro.
Entonces colaboramos compartimos, pero yo no le conozco personalmente, pero si queréis que lo hago, y si no, pues
No sé, o tú o Juan Antonio. Si como tú estás ahora aquí, faltan solo 3 minutos, quizás, si no te importa, te mando su bio ahora
sí,
por email.
claro, mándamela.
Sí, vale.
Sí, sí, claro, lo hago, sin problema. Perdona,
Sí,
Antonella,
dime.
Antonella,
Sí, sí, sí.
perdóname, es que casi mejor que la haga Juan Antonio, porque es que yo estoy ahora mismo en una situación bastante especial. Estoy aquí con mi bebé,
Ah,
va a venir
vale, vale, vale,
una
no te
señora
preocupes.
a cuidarle para que yo dé la conferencia a la vez. Entonces, ahora mismo no soy la persona más indicada, porque si
Vale,
acaso
vale,
interrumpe o algo
no
y
te
va a estar
preocupes.
grabado,
Vale,
no va
vale.
a quedar
Lo
absolutamente
entiendo
nada
perfectamente.
profesional.
No hay
Puede
que
quedar muy
añadir.
tierno, que el bebé de repente se le oiga o algo, pero no va a quedar profesional. Así que si lo puede hacer mejor Juan Antonio, os lo agradezco.
Muy bien, muy bien, muy bien. Sí, sí, sí. Es que no hay que añadir más estrés a lo que tienes ya.
Gracias.
¿Cuántos meses tiene tu bebé?
Ah, pues tiene 10 meses.
Ah, qué bien. Genial,
Gracias.
enhorabuena. ¿Es niño o niña?
Es niño, sí.
Qué bien.
Gracias. Sí,
Claro, es que me acuerdo la última conferencia que fue hace 2 años,
sí.
acababas de casarte, yo creo.
Sí, 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 sí. Justo. Sí, sí.
A ver, entonces vamos a ver si vienen los otros. Es que quedan solo 2 minutos, si no, Maya, es todo tuyo.
Vale, no pasa nada. Bueno, pues como no viene, pues pásamelo y ya está, lo hago yo. No te preocupes, ¿vale? Lo hago yo, no pasa nada.
No, es que todavía no hay los otros
Pues
panelistas.
ya ha venido la chica que va a cuidar a mi bebé, entonces se lo voy a dar y ya está, ¿vale? Solucionado. Y me meto en mi despacho y así lo puedo hacer yo, ¿vale?
Vale,
Dame
vale.
un
Ok.
segundo. Gracias. Eh, María Jesús. Hola, bonita. Que lo que te decía, que a lo mejor necesita dormir un poquito antes porque no ha dormido casi siesta. Si quieres, si ves que tienes sueño, le puedes dormir. Aunque ha dormido un poquitín. Estoy en mi cuarto. Ah, vale. O sea que mira, si quieres le puedes dormir un poquitín o bien, si ves que ya no necesita dormir.
Si no tiene sueño.
Mira, voy a subir aquí un poquito la luz, que está muy bajita. Si no tienes sueño, pues ya merendar.
¿Qué le doy?
Y casi,
Naranja.
sí, casi mejor, porque así nos duerme más por la noche. Tenemos aquí, puedes darle o fruta o por ejemplo una manzana rallada, ¿sabes? Sí, o mejor para no complicarte, como es un día especial, ¿vale? ¿Quieres hacer un segundo baño?
No.
Me quiero esperar por el trabajo de los niños, pero no me
Llevo un bote de
Estoy aquí, Antonella.
Sí, no te preocupes.
Pues sí, tenemos que empezar ya, que son las 5 y no están los
Sí.
demás.
No, Maya, no hay nadie. Entonces estoy hablando con Adrián. Vamos a ver lo que podemos hacer porque
Vale.
realmente
Si no, ¿puedo empezar yo, si no? O
sí,
bueno, lo que me digáis, perdón.
no, puedes empezar tú si van a venir los demás, porque si no, no tienes un panel para ti sola, es un poco...
¡Qué risa! Oye, eso, a ver, pues un minuto. Un minuto y venga.
¿Qué tal, Adrián? Espera, a ver qué voy a decir.
Gracias, hasta luego. Bueno, lo que sea, me avisáis. Gracias. Okay, I'm here. So whenever you want, Antonella. Hello, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, perfect. So,
Sorry, Maya.
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We're just going to wait a few more minutes because for the moment you are the only panelist.
All right.
So we're going to wait a few minutes to see if Juan Antonio Sanchez Jimenez and Victor Huertas Martin can join us, are going to join us. So let's just give them a few more minutes.
Good. One question. I would like to know if I can see that you are watching my screen or not, because I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to see what the other people see.
I can see your screen, Maya.
Yeah, you see my, but
Yeah.
my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, but maybe this is not correct all the time. I mean, when the other presenters, are they going to show their screens too? I mean, do I have to stop now? Do I have to change something?
You can you exit and then come? I mean, can you not exit yourself, but exit? I mean, close the document that you have opened, and
Okay.
okay, yeah. You have the button. You know what it says? Compartir pantalla.
Mm-hmm.
So you just click on it.
Mm.
Or you can leave it like that for the moment anyway. Maya, since you are the only panelist for the moment, you can leave you can still share your screen. It doesn't matter.
But it's good to know how to do it. Now I only see you know what I see. I don't need to explain you. Just could you help me? Could you tell me how can I show my screen and stop showing my screen? Where do I have to click?
So on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you have a button that says compartir pantalla.
I can see está compartiendo pantalla right now.
Okay.
Is
and
it
so
there?
There must be.
Oh, dejaré. Oh.
Yeah. You see? Okay.
Perfect. Now I know. This way I share.
Okay.
In this way I stop sharing. Perfect.
Okay, super. So I think we have someone. All right. Okay, so one of those who are now. Just hold on, sorry. Let me see. Le doy. Okay. I think we're going to have someone else. All right. All right. Okay. Good.
Hola.
Hola. Hello.
Hola, ¿qué tal? No escucho, ¿eh? No escucho.
You can't hear us?
Antonio?
Hola.
Okay. I can hear you very well. Can you hear us?
I can hear you as well.
Okay, okay. So just let me put your name on your video so that
Hi, Maya.
people know who you are. So it's Juan Antonio, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Sanchez. So we are still missing our moderator, who is Victor Huertas.
Mhm.
So since you're only 3 participants this afternoon, so we can still wait a few more minutes and see if he arrives. Otherwise, we will just have to start without him.
Okay.
Let's wait a minute.
Maya, we need to go and see a play.
Yeah, that would be great. Yes, yes, yes.
Another play. I haven't seen you for a while, eh?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and in fact, I went to the theater once, to Teatro del Canal, and they are respecting the distance, and everybody was wearing the face mask. So if we have time and we can do it,
yeah,
I would be delighted.
Yeah, I mean, last time was great, you know.
It was really interesting. You know, at the beginning, I was not very convinced about the experimental play, but some days later, I appreciated it more, which is interesting. It's something that can happen with contemporary works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's an experience that you have to go through. I mean, live, you know, because I've been teaching. I taught contemporary theater, teatro del siglo XXI, last term, you know, and I have one of my students read the play, you know, that we saw, you know, and she didn't like it. She didn't like it. I mean, it's not the same, you know, to see the play live, you know, as to read it, you know, in a book, you know. So you know, as I say, something that you have to experience, you know, not just to read.
So. That's true. It's very different.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Antonella?
Yes. I just want to say, do you think should we maybe start? If then Victor Huertas Martin join us later,
yeah,
that's not a problem.
Yeah.
So welcome to this afternoon session in English. We have today 2 speakers, Juan Antonio Sanchez Jimenez and Maya Zalbidea Paniagua. I just would like to start introducing Juan Antonio Sanchez Jimenez. You have 15 to 20 minutes for your presentation. It will be followed by approximately 10 minutes of questions that we will be reading through the chat, and then we will move on to Maya. Juan Antonio Sanchez Jimenez is an instructor at the English Studies Department of the University of Madrid Complutense. He holds a PhD in English from the University of Alcalá and is active as a conference organizer and author of papers on contemporary American literature, history, and culture. And this afternoon, the title of his presentation is Heroes, Monsters, and Superheroines in Noel Stevenson's Animations and Comics. So.
All right. Let me share my screen with you.
Yep.
All right. Is this fine?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see.
You can, right? All of you can, right? Okay. Let's see. Right. Okay. So, yeah. So basically, this is an introduction to Noel Stevenson's work. It's a work in progress, you know. So I still have to research more on these issues, but I wanted to share with you, you know, some of the conclusions I have arrived at, you know, in the process of research that I have been doing. Okay, so Noel Stevenson is famous for different comic series and books that she has worked on. For example, Lumberjanes, dealing with a group of girls, okay, at a summer scout camp. But the works that we are going to talk about today are related, okay, to popular culture, right, and the life of Noelle Stevenson, right? Because I think these are the two main influences on her work, right? Noelle Stevenson is 29 years old. She's very young, you know, but she has become very successful, especially among those interested in comic books, right? Not only in the United States, but in all around the world. Okay, she began to do art, fan art. Okay, she was inspired in some TV series, for example, The Avengers, right? And she basically did some drawings, right? Okay, about these the main characters of this series, right? And she became very popular with these drawings because she published them in her blog, right? In a blog that she began, I think it was around 2011. Okay, The Avengers, right? Okay, Hulk, Iron Man, etc. Right? She also did some work on the Hunger Games, right? As I said, many people began to read and see these images in her blog, and she became popular, you know, and she had kind of a great following, right, at the time. She became quite famous with her book Nimona, right? Nimona was nominated, was finalist of the National Book Award. I think she was the youngest comic book writer to be nominated for a National Book Award in the history of the United States. So I would like to deal first with Nimona, right? And tell you about the process of composition of this character, right, and of this book, right? Nimona was born, I think, when Noelle Stevenson was around 19 years old. She was born in one of her classes, right? She took a sequential art class at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, okay, under the supervision of a professor called John Hilty. And that's when the character Nimona was first created, right? Then she was, the character was the protagonist of a web comic, right? And she began to add other characters, right, to the comic. And basically, it's a mixture of, it's a combination of fantasy, science fiction, right, and a medieval setting, right? Now it's interesting because in this comic book, right, she uses the character of the knight, of the hero, okay, and the anti-hero, but she kind of modifies some concepts about this basic, right, opposition, okay, between hero and anti-hero, between good and evil. The good characters are not as good as they seem, and the bad characters are as better than they seem, right? Okay, and I relate that to the the experience and life of the author herself, right? Of Noelle Stevenson. Nimona has the quality of being a shapeshifter. That means that she can change her aspect, right? And she can become other entities, right? It's like a little bit as Mortadelo, right? Okay, and she may be just like a little girl, you know, innocent to some extent, and in some cases she can be a terrible being, right? Like she can become a wolf and kill people and so on, right? Okay, it's very easy for her to change, right? Her personality and her aspect, you know. And I attribute that to a process of growing up, you know, of the creator of the author, right? At the point when she hasn't defined very well her personality, right? And she was also dealing with a change in um, or uh, or established, okay, identity of her sexual orientation, right? Now, if you have a look at some of the drawings that she was doing at that time, you know, while she was drawing Nimona, okay, she draws herself, you know, as being an empty being that can be at the same time violent and terrible, right? So so there is this shift between like evil and good, as I told you, right? Okay. Could you control your fire so it warms instead of destroys, right? But this is also kind of a self-portrait, right? Okay, and some other images that deal with this. Noelle Stevenson defines herself as a non-binary person. That means that she wants to go beyond this kind of confrontation, okay, this binary opposition between man and woman, right? Okay, and this is a very recent drawing that she has published, and as I said, this lack of self-definition, you know, is contributes to this first comic series and first comic book that she wrote, right? This is like her personal influence on her work, you know, but as you know, other exterior influences, I have selected, for example, the TV series Merlin, and I have found some reference in her blog about this TV series that became very famous around the time where she was composing Nimona and before. Game of Thrones, right? There are some references to Game of Thrones, and especially I would say Lord of the Rings, which um, is a TV movie series, let's say, that Noelle Stevenson followed, right? Okay, and she even did some fan art of it, right? Okay, she kind of made contemporary versions of the characters of the Lord of the Ring. Actually, all these characters, okay, she included, right, okay, in kind of a group called the Broship of the Ring, right? Some kind of hipsters, right, characters of versions of the Lord of the Rings, right, of the characters of the Lord of the Rings, right? You have Gandalf there, right, okay, etc., etc. She has also dealt with other heroes and superheroes, right? She wrote a story for Marvel, okay, about Thor, right? She also drew, sorry, a short story about Wonder Woman, okay, and a version of a personal version of Wonder Woman, okay, for DC Comics, right? And so she has been dealing, as I say, with this figure of the hero, but at the same time, and the superhero, but at the same time, reflecting on the archetype, right, of the hero and heroine, right? Okay. Now, she finished her studies. As I said, she is very young, and she moved to Los Angeles, right? Okay. This was the time when she met Molly Ostertag, who is another comic book writer. She has worked, for example, in books such as Strong Female Protagonist, and actually she married her. Okay. This is what I was telling you about. You know, at the beginning, you know, earlier in her life, she began dating boys, right? Okay, and then she dated women. You know, so it's not. I mean, that's what I told you, that she identifies as non-binary. You know, because she wants to go against the prejudice that you have to be a man or a woman, right? Or you have to date men and women and so on. And this was the point when she began to work on animation, right? She became the showrunner of a very famous Netflix animated series called She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Okay, She-Ra and the Princess of Power. I think that the name She-Ra comes from hero. Okay, instead of hero, She-Ra. Okay, and this tells you a little bit about the orientation of this TV series, right? Not only She-Ra, but the Princesses of Power. Okay. Now, where does this series come from? Okay. Now we need to talk first about the franchise, The Masters of the Universe, right? He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, okay? And it's a franchise because He-Man and some other characters, okay, became just toys, right? It was a toy line developed for young boys, right? In the 80s, right? Okay. Now, it became, as you know, just toys, right? This is He-Man and his enemy Skeletor, right? But soon, the whole business extended to comics, to video games, okay, and also to animated movies, right? In the 80s, right, and a movie, okay, called He-Man and She-Ra and the Secret of the Sword came out, right? And it was the first time when She-Ra, okay, was portrayed, okay, as a character, right? Now She-Ra is the twin sister of He-Man, okay, right? And soon she also became part of this whole universe, right? Of Mattel, right? The Masters of the Universe, right? She was part of the video game, okay, where He-Man was the protagonist, right? And in 2018, the Netflix series was delivered, right? And it's kind of a reboot of the original series and a movie. So there are some changes, right? That kind of update, right? The character and also the concept of hero and heroine, right? Okay. There is there are some changes in the aspect, okay, of the protagonist, but there is more than that, right? Okay. In the series, you find not only characters with Anglo-Saxon appearance, but you also find characters that come from minority. For example, here to the right, you can see one of the, I would say, few male characters, Bo, okay, who has, I don't know if African American or Latino features, right? And another very important change, okay, with this series, and remember that this is a series for children, okay? This is a series for children, right? Is that most of the characters are women. The superheroine is a woman, okay? And the people in power are also women, okay? So here, for example, you have Shura accompanied by some other princesses who are women, right? Okay, and it's kind of an empowerment, right, of women as heroines or super heroines. As I said, this is a series for children, right? And it's the first time when you see a kiss between two women, right? Okay, Shira here you have Shira, right? And this is Catra, who is her enemy, right? But like in season 5, they get to kiss each other, right? Okay, and so this is a kind of a big change, right? Okay. Of course, Shira has become a toy, the new version of Shira, right? Okay, and she has also been incorporated into comics. And as general influences, right, on this series, right, on this character, we could point out like several elements related to different mythologies, right? Okay. For example, there is a very important character which looks like Pegasus. I said who because the character can talk and so on, right? Okay. Also, influences of the Arthurian mythological world. Okay. A very important game board that Noelle Stevenson was aware of. Okay, she did some fan art on this game, on this franchise, right? Okay, and she talks about how she creates a character who's chaotic evil teen, right? And in later on, she created like a more inoffensive, okay, character, right? Okay, and this character was kind of haunted by demons, but at the end, he or she is able to liberate herself, right? Okay. I think this is related to Noelle Stevenson's own life because, of course, Shira is able to beat evil, okay? And probably it's a figure that she has, the creator herself, okay, Noelle Stevenson, as a reference, because during the time where she was creating, okay, this TV series, she went through a depression. She needed help, right? She went to a psychiatrist and so on, right? Okay. So there is like an intense relationship between Noelle Stevenson's life and work, right? Okay. So we're going to finish the presentation very soon, and just wanted to mention some other influences that this series may have had from my point of view. Science fiction in the form of TV series again, right? Star Trek, and especially the Star Wars saga, right? Okay, there are many similarities between some aspects of um, of um, Shura, okay, and the Princesses of Power, and the mythology, okay, created in Star Wars. Not only the main enemy, right, is very similar, but I mean, as I say, there are many moments. For example, Shura is taught to handle her sword by a character called Light Hope, and this is, I mean, this education is very similar to the education that Luke Skywalker goes through, you know, with Yoda and the handling of the lightsaber and many things, right? So, I mean, to finish everything up, Noelle Stevenson's work, right, is influenced by her life experience, right, okay, and by popular culture, okay, and especially TV series, right, okay, and very specifically with TV series that deal with heroes, heroines, and superheroes and superheroines, right? If you want to know more about Noelle Stevenson's life, you can have a look at her first autobiography that came out like some months ago, and it's called The Fire Never Goes Out, okay, where she talks about how he created all these characters and books and series and so on, and her own life. This is a Stevenson, a very recent photo of Stevenson, and this is the final slide with a very comic the end. And that's all.
Thank you very much, Juan Antonio, for your presentation. Let's see if we have any questions from our chat. There's a question from Christina Doku. How do you situate Noelle Stevenson's work in relation to her LGBTIQ comic book artists, Bechtel, Carroll, especially as regards the general tendency, as most critics have confirmed, to create highly autobiographical work?
Well, I mean, she, as I say, she has written an autobiographical book, right? She draws from, this is the book I was telling you about, okay? And The Fire Never Goes Out. She draws from, or she drew from the comic drawings that she had been introducing in her blog, okay? But what, so I mean, in this sense, there is a relationship between Alison Bechdel's books, you know, and Noelle Stevenson's. What I was trying to say, okay, or to develop in this presentation is that I think it's not only autobiographical stories that you can read, okay, written by Noelle Stevenson, but her own work, you know, Nimona, you know, Shura, and so on, have had an influence, okay, on Noelle Stevenson's work.
Thank you, Juan Antonio, and thank you, Cristina, for your question. There's another question from Maria Augusta Albuja, who asks whether we can find gender-neutral pronouns in any of these works and adaptations to other media.
So, can you ask the question again?
Yes. Can we find gender-neutral pronouns in any of these works and adaptation to other media?
No. I mean, no, that I remember of. I mean, she's very aware, you know, of this binary opposition, okay, and that's why she confesses her she confessed that, or she portrays herself as non-binary, you know. But I think it's, you know, beyond grammar, you know, and syntax and morphology, you know, beyond saying he or she, you know, and his or her. I think it's something that you can see in the drawings that she does, right? Okay, and how she portrays herself, right? Okay, and how she changes those drawings, you know, and how she may or may not identify with being a man or being a woman. Okay, so I think that's one way she wants to go against this kind of pigeonholing, okay, of people, right? Okay, but you're a man, you're a woman, and you have to do this, you have to do that, right? And that's interesting. And beyond that, as I say, in her work, she portrays that. For example, in She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, there are some characters, okay, who are supposed to be transgender. Okay, so I think it's a very contemporary view, okay, of this world of heroines, and especially of super heroines, okay, that populates, you know, popular culture, you know, especially comics, you know, and now movies and so on.
Thank you. There's another question from Ana Aparicio Rodriguez, who would like to ask you about the redesign of the different body types in the She-Ra reboot. Scorpia, for instance, is a very tall, muscular woman, very different from the skinny, sexualized first version.
Correct. This is another thing that Noelle Stevenson tries to do, right? Okay. For example, here in this image, you have different body sizes, right? Okay. I mean, usually, you know, in like the typical story of heroes and heroines and superheroes, especially superheroes and superheroines, you have like the main characters having like the perfect body and so on, right? Okay. Glimmer here, okay, to the right, is one of the protagonists of the story, right? And as you can see, she's not especially slim, right? Okay. You have other princesses, okay. Some are slimmer than the others. Another one is kind of small, right? So she's trying to go beyond this concept of, you know, of the heroines, you know, the protagonists and the characters having the perfect body, right? Okay, and this is another step ahead that Noelle Stevenson takes, I think.
Thank you. I would just like also to welcome, Victor Huertas Martin, who has just joined us on the panel. Welcome to this session.
Hello, Victor.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, how's it going? I'm sorry for this. I had a problem with the internet connection. I couldn't access here earlier. I'm very sorry. I've been suffering for about 1 hour and a half, and
Okay.
the entire connection went from my house. Sorry, I'm very sorry, Antonella and
No problem.
Juan Antonio. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. You just arrived on time because it's the next one is you, if it's all right. If there are no more questions for Juan Antonio, there was just a comment by Ana Aparicio Rodriguez, who was just saying that there actually is a non-binary character in She-Ra Double Trouble, and they use they, them pronouns. So that was just a comment. So if there are no further questions, let's move on to Victor Huertas Martin. I'll just introduce Victor to all of you. Victor Huertas Martin is licenciado in English literature and doctor in English literature. His research evolves around Shakespeare and popular culture and the relationship between television and literature. He is a professor ayudante of the University of Extremadura. And today he will talk about mythical features in science fiction adaptations of Shakespeare's The Tempest. So it's all yours, Victor.
Thank you very much. Should I press compartir pantalla then to
Yes.
show my PowerPoint? So okay, fine. It's quite good. Fine. So you can see the presentation.
Yes.
It's not very extensive, but I think it would work because this project is a work in process at this moment. But I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for accepting this proposal and for accepting me now at this moment. Sorry about the connection. I'm trying to just gather up my spirits for this, but hopefully it will be clear and interesting. The whole idea came from the associations between The Tempest and science fiction. As you probably know, there has been a plethora of adaptations of The Tempest, William Shakespeare's play, as a science fiction piece. Of course, one iconic example is The Forbidden Planet by Fred Wilcox, which was premiered on the cinemas in the 1950s. And of course, this film was a revolutionary product because it reconceived the play from this genre perspective. But of course, what is impressive is that this idea of Shakespeare as science fiction has continued over the second half of the 20th century and has exploded in the earlier years of the 21st century. So overall, what I pursue is to analyze. Well, I'm going to show you to pass the pictures. I suppose I just have to. Okay, fine. The overall objectives I pursue is to explore myth and science fiction in the text of The Tempest, and following the critical history of Shakespeare and popular culture, my idea is to include Shakespearean adaptations and Shakespearean appropriations in this corpus of Shakespeare, as we call it. So, of course, the question often formulated by students and by experts is, okay, this production or this adaptation is fine, but is this Shakespeare? According to this idea, Shakespeare would be everything which is done about Shakespeare, which doesn't guarantee it is good, of course, but it is still Shakespeare, even if Shakespeare means Shakespeare in inverted commas. So I'm revising those features in Shakespeare, and also I'm revising a large corpus of adaptations and also the source text, because the idea again is to revise these adaptations and then trying to go back to the source text. To the source text published in the folio in 1623 by John Heminges and Henry Condell, and then see if we can reread The Tempest from this perspective. Because several attempts have been tried to read The Tempest as a science fiction piece. Probably the term science fiction is not the best label for Shakespeare's The Tempest. Sometimes called a comedy, as appears published in the folio. Lately called a romance because of the fantastic, magic, adventurous, geographic features which, of course, populate the play itself and help reading the play. Because the term science fiction is problematic to talk about this play or about any text which is published before the 19th century. I prefer and choose to use the term prospective fiction, which has been coined by Fernando Ángel Moreno, an expert in science fiction or in prospective literature, using the word teoría de la ciencia ficción, retrospectiva, poética y retrospectiva. Good. So of course, this term, which intends to be much broader and much more accurate, I would say, and much more historically relevant at this point to define science fiction, would be the one that I would choose to define this corpus of adaptations, and also to explore The Tempest source text as such. An additional purpose would be to rethink and to explore in which respects this idea of The Tempest as a prospective piece of fiction would affect criticism on Shakespeare and popular culture, more particularly Shakespeare and popular culture and science fiction, because in the last few years, a body of works of Shakespeare have been adapted to science fiction. Hamlet, Henry IV, most of them, Macbeth too, most of them have been adapted to dystopias or to science fiction narratives. So the idea would be to reanalyze all these corpuses and rethink the concept of Shakespeare and sci-fi as perspective. The justification for these hypotheses, which I find very important to justify, of course, the choosing of the terminology, I think would be clear with a few examples. Of course, there are references in the literature of the 19th century to The Tempest as a text which is embedded generally in pre-science fiction works, such as, of course, H.G. Wells' and The World of the Worlds, one you may be quite familiar with. In this novel, what happens is that the Martians eventually land on the Earth and a catastrophe is produced. The protagonist somehow appears locked up in a refuge with a technician. The technician proposes the idea of starting anew, of creating a brave new world. Brave new world, as you know, it is the phrase which Miranda, the daughter of Prospero, says in the end of The Tempest, in the Act 5 from The Tempest, when she meets the noblemen of Milan who visit the island. She says, "How beautiful is mankind. This is a brave new world." Meaning, of course, well, you could read this text in an ironic way. It could mean brave new world, considering the fact that all these noblemen were traitors to the state, traitors to Prospero, and traitors to the dukedom of Milan. But also, it could be hopeful and literal in the sense that, well, this gathering of nobles, this gathering of people who are just suddenly going to make peace after years of confrontation, and after Prospero has displayed all his magical technological machinery to pursue revenge, after all this could mean a reconciliation, a true reconciliation, problematic, but nevertheless true reconciliation. So what you examine in this sentence is that, of course, it has a meaning and a semiotic force which has been carrying in other science fiction adaptations or science fiction references. Brave New World, the novel by Aldous Huxley, again goes back to Shakespeare for a start, using the sentence, the phrase quoted by Miranda, or quoting the phrase by Miranda, suggesting the possibility of a brave new world in a dystopian world in which consumerism, manipulation, or media manipulation constitute a premonition, a hypothesis on what the future would be like if the media, if a society of pleasures and a society of spectacle would take power over the earth. And the alternative proposed to this dystopian situation is looking back into the times in which Shakespeare's words became where a commonality or a source of energy to produce commonality, to produce a society which was much more engaged with human beings in general, or human beings engaged with each other, a community of human beings collectively and individually undertaking a certain progressive purpose or a certain progressive enterprise. Forbidden Planet, of course, proposes a very interesting hypothesis. It proposes the hypothesis that scientifically it is possible to create a new society, and scientifically it is possible to imagine a civilization much more advanced than us, which managed to create life without the help of technical equipment. As you probably know, if you saw how Dr. Morbius shows the navigators of the spacecraft which lands on the planet, as he explains, what these people were able to do, this civilization disappeared, the Krell civilization were able to have such a vast management of technology that they could create life, and a life which would sustain itself without the help of technology. So the problem which is presented in Forbidden Planet is, I think, in The Tempest, in Shakespeare's text, and also in the other adaptations, which is something which has to be contrasted across all the adaptations. To an extent, of course, science is part of science fiction. Fernando Ángel Moreno makes a controversy about this because, as he says, for most of the time, science fiction has been consisting of a catalog of scientific advances advancements. In the 1950s, this acquired an optimistic ideological general enjoyment on the population who enjoyed science fiction. The problem is that in the last few years, it was discovered and it became clear that science fiction doesn't truly predict what is going to happen, neither scientifically nor politically nor in any other respects. If we think about 1984, A Brave New World, of course, because of the pandemic, all the public discourse obsessively returns to 1984, to a lesser extent to A Brave New World, and of course to The Handmaid's Tale and many others. But of course we can't say that we live in 1984. We can't say we live in Brave New World. We can't say we live in those worlds. We've got many other things in our world. So what is clear is that science fiction as a term which intends to discover what science will be like in the future is not working. That's why the idea of prospective would work in this respect. And thinking about perspective, the idea of myth becomes relevant and useful. And of course, it helps explaining areas of science fiction which or areas of the perspective where science as such, science, rationality, mathematics, and all the disciplines cannot work. Mythological criticism or myth criticism has reached the conclusion that myths have a rational explanation. Of course, the language of science is extremely complicated. If we think about computer science, for example, computers do not speak human language. They use the binary code. And of course, to an extent, human beings are mystified by science in this regard. We need divulgation, we need programs which explain and translate science fiction to us. So that opens up the scope of science fiction or the scope of science, because where do you distinguish science as such and then the explanation of science? To a point, science acquires the features of narrative, and this is where myth becomes a useful tool to explain the limits of science fiction, or to go where science as an instrument to understand the reality is fail because it doesn't sufficiently address all humans, or because maybe science hasn't gone as far as it could go. So of course the idea of the perspective would be useful because it helps presenting hypotheses. If we think about Shakespeare and the corpus of adaptations of science fiction, we could organize them into four historical blocks. The first one I have already mentioned, the block of works which would be considered pre-science fiction, the block of the golden 60s, and the block of the works produced in the 1970s and 1990s, and then the block of works produced in the early 2000s. I'm just going to revise them very briefly because I don't think we have to examine all of them together. I have already talked about, sorry, not the Time Machine, but the World of the Worlds. No, yeah, the Time Machine. No, the War of the Worlds. Sorry about the mistake. It should be the World of the Worlds, which presents a hypothesis on what would be a new world once the Martians invade and destroy the Earth completely. How would we human beings begin there? And the sentence by Shakespeare is what becomes the motor, if you want to say so, or let's say the resort which sets all this idea in motion. Brave New World is, as I said, a novel in which science fiction becomes Shakespeare's works become a retrospective, a gaze back to the past, which allows us to rethink our position in the current world, and coming back to the pleasure of words, to the intellectual power of words, the iambic pentameter verse, and especially the commonality and the social power of Shakespeare's plays, which are characterized by the empathy and by the agglutinating force, which of course let's say defines the way in which Shakespeare characterizes people. We could distinguish a second period, the so-called golden 60s, in which we may distinguish a few television adaptations and television works paying attention to The Tempest as a science fiction piece. I would highlight The Tempest by George Schaefer, starred by Richard Barton playing Caliban, a television production which iconographically acquires many features of science fiction. What is interesting about this is that, of course, it is still a period in which science fiction is very much focused on the surface features, on Martians, on spacecrafts, and on the material elements of science fiction, not necessarily on the idea of the perspective or the idea of the hypothesis, to think of a new world, to think of what life could be like in the upcoming years. We got novels, we got the film The Forbidden Planet, and a chapter of Star Trek, Requiem for Methuselah. As you know, Shakespeare is frequently mentioned in Star Trek, and The Tempest is mentioned.
18 horas.
Sorry, that was my clock in the computer. Requiem for Methuselah is the example in which The Tempest appears most often in Star Trek. In this episode, basically the troopers land on a planet which is pretty much run as in the same way as Prospero runs the island which he inhabits. So the whole episode might be called, or might be termed as an adaptation or a recasting of the play in this specific episode, reproducing pretty much the essence of the story. In the 1970s and 1990s, it is already clear that science fiction is not so much about science, but about a much more human, a much more, let's say, personal and ideological concern. So, of course, there are a few films and a few adaptations which might be potentially regarded as science fiction or as perspective. One example which we could highlight would be The Return to the Forbidden Planet, a musical play which became a success in the 1990s in London and New York, and of course Sandman Shakespeare, written by Neil Gaiman. In this interesting comic book, there is a conjunction which I regard as interesting in what I define as this very peculiar association of sci-fi or perspective in Shakespeare's The Tempest. In this episode of Sandman Shakespeare, the Sandman, this creature, this spirit which controls Shakespeare across the comic book, intends to explain at all levels why is it that Shakespeare has this genius, and how could he so genially create this idea, this fiction, isn't it? And of course, there are many elements of the material reality that explain how the idea of the science, or the idea of the Tempest could come to Shakespeare's mind. If you remember the episode, some people bring to a tavern the cadaver of an Indian fellow from the New World, and that begins that gives the idea to Shakespeare. But the genius, the power, the magic of the words come apparently from the gift granted by the Sandman to Shakespeare, to the spirit which often appears and affects also the features and the destinies of other great writers of artists, or simply entrepreneurs of the Elizabethan and the medieval periods. Good. When the explosion really takes place is in the 2000s. What happens in the 2000s? If we follow the Fernando Ángel Moreno's work on prospective narrative or prospective fiction, what we discover again is that perspective could be a much more interesting term to define science fiction, because it situates men and women or human beings in a world where answers and responses are not anymore available. We live in a so-called postmodern society where truths, where solid values are not anymore let's say, graspable. We live in a society which Bauman has called, again, the liquid society. Well, we know all these ideas of postmodernity not being solid, not being extremely, let's say, reliable in this regard. So this is the time in which, curiously, The Tempest, this play which advocates for a brave new world, produces a massive amount of adaptations. Some of them, of course, produce different hypotheses. And again, what I want to move here is that depending on the adaptation on The Tempest, a different hypothesis of what life could be like in the future is proposed. So Ilium and Olympus, as part of the same, there are two works which come in tandem. What they do is they present the characters in The Tempest and characters in Shakespeare's plays associated with characters from the Iliad and from the Greek mythology. So this prospective piece of literature intends to agglutinate the discourses of different writers, Shakespeare, Homer, and characters who have become basically part of the popular popular imagination. The hypothesis has to do again with thinking of these discourses embodied by those characters in a near future. Lost has been interesting because it uses literature, it uses literary intertext consistently and proposes another hypothesis. What would happen if humanity suddenly disappeared? What would happen again? All these guys who gather themselves in the island are destined to disappear. The whole series is about redemption, isn't it? The whole motif is about redemption, constantly sustained by the literary texts which they read, James Joyce's text and many other texts. And of course, Shakespeare is not explicitly considered as one of the texts read by the characters, at least not frequently that I know. But the whole structure, the whole island, the whole functioning of the island, as if this terrain had a kind of life of its own, suggests that to an extent it fulfills the same functions which the island in Shakespeare fulfills, which means this is a place where mankind revises itself and proposes new ideas and new hypotheses on how to live, even if this hypothesis involves disappearing forever and giving way to a new race or to a new type of mankind. La Tempestad, a comic book by Santiago Garcia and Javier Peinado, are extremely radical in their attack against corporate capitalism. In this fantastic comic book, Caliban takes power. Caliban, a super machine, aggressive, designed to kill and to destroy, basically destroys Prospero, destroys the nobles. And when Ferdinand and Miranda offer to him the possibility of integration in the new world which Miranda wants to create, Caliban destroys them too. So of course this is radical in the sense that it eliminates completely capitalism, symbolically at least, and it destroys society. So what is going to happen is what we do not know, because Caliban is going to be master of the world in this world, we suppose. I'm not going to explain all of them because they are, I think the Baltic is quite extensive. We know, of course, Westworld, which is about androids and about the possibility of creating new human beings which may make decisions. Comparisons have been established between Prospero and the scientists who organized this park, this theme park, which of course in the end takes new life of its own and intends to take over control of it and the world as a whole. Gregory Doran's production of The Tempest, produced by the Royal Shakespeare Company, hypothesizes about virtual reality, about the possibility of creating reality with our minds, and the whole spectacle itself produced these dialectics between the actors as bodies working on the stage, and the avatars projected in the virtual reality landscape presented in the performance in itself. One novel which is significant, the Insubstantial Pageant, helps me reconnecting my argument with Shakespeare's source text as such. In this novel, what the author, Kate Story, does is to establish an analogy between the Earth, a planet which is bound to disappear, and then again to confront the insignificance of the Earth with the massiveness of the universe and the endless possibilities which are afforded by the universe, with a theatrical metaphor which has been proposed by Shakespeare. According to some interesting recent writing, which doubtless has been produced by the amount of adaptations of The Tempest of science fiction, we got two different hypotheses on what could have been the let's say features which sustain the idea that The Tempest could have been science fiction or proto-science fiction. Scott Marciano analyzes the scientific texts of the period. Of course, Giordano Bruno's philosophical ideas and many other ideas connected to modern philosophy appear there as important texts. What Scott Marciano does is to examine The Tempest, thinking of the possibilities proposed by Francis Bacon, and both in New Atlantis and also in other scientific writing, or rather philosophical writing, which of course was becoming or was on the way of becoming science eventually. So of course what Francis Bacon's influence might have been in The Tempest would be that at some point life could have been created, or life could be created, or life could be recreated out of the magical arts which Prospero exercises. One of the interesting hypotheses proposed by Marciano would be that Prospero has been a magician which actually knows so much about the technicalities and about the, let's say, intricacies of science, that he has been able to revive the dead. The hypothesis is that Miranda is actually a dead person revived by her own father. Because if you analyze how Miranda evokes her past, she's only at 20 years of age or 18 years of age. How is it possible that she doesn't know, that she doesn't remember at all how she came to the island? It must be because at some point she was hypnotized, or because she was probably dead at some point. And Massiano establishes a connection between life and death, and the ongoing performance which life is. And of course, what is interesting is that in this final play written by Shakespeare, Prospero says that theatre in the end is an insubstantial pageant, or unsubstantial pageant, where people work as actors and finally they are just going to disappear. They are somehow going to become the substance which compose dreams, but not substantial in the sense of solid matter, but substantial as imagination. Donald Carlson proposes an even more radical proposition, and rather reactionary in many respects, but interesting nonetheless. He talks about Vitruvius, or the Vitruvian influence in the composition of the theatrical Renaissance architecture, and advances that the writers of the period, including Shakespeare, were familiar with Vitruvius, and were of course familiar with the mathematical sciences, with the laws of harmony, geometry, which were necessary in order to think about the articulation of special effects in the theater. The Tempest was performed for the first time in the playhouse called the Blackfriars. The Blackfriars, as opposed to the Globe, which was the popular open playhouse, was equipped with the latest technology. So of course, Shakespeare must have been quite familiar with the possibilities of this technology. That situates the Tempest in this very interesting realm of technology, and many philosophical questions come associated with it. Donald Carlson reads the Tempest and Prospero's renunciation to magic, and this is going to be the final point of the research so far. Donald Carlson defends that very likely the point which Shakespeare is trying to make is that Prospero renounces magic because he finds out that the human beings are not ready to handle this technology. This technology he uses is producing, to an extent, distress. It is capable of affording him the revenge he wants to afford, but somehow he knows that there is a danger that this technology gets out of hand. That is why he assumes the risk of returning to Milan, knowing very well that his brother Antonio may well try again to dethrone him, as he tried to do, but he undertakes the risk. He renounces the technology, he renounces the magic. Going back to religion, looking into the religious dimension of the play, one interpretation could be that Prospero renounces technology for religion. So of course that could mean that the play could be a rather regressive or reactionary play. But of course it is not irrelevant that, for example, the Forbidden Planet film makes a similar point. It says that, of course, yes, we could have technology, we have rationality, we got these possibilities, endless possibilities of creating life, and even renouncing technology in the future. So technology could be as powerful that it could somehow reformulate itself, as happens with the Golem by Stanislav's Helm, isn't it? The computer becomes so powerful that it creates its own psychology, its own possibilities. In many ways, it works as an advice on responsibility, which of course sometimes could be a bit disappointing, because one looks at these adaptations and the impression is that the message conveyed is that technology has to be renounced, or at least we have to take into account other elements such as the id, the superego, and the Freudian ideas which are developed in the Forbidden Planet, or the more human element, which of course is also necessary in association with technology. This is where myth, which is the unexplainable, or the irrational, or the rational, the rationalization of the explainable in many respects, completes the effect of science, or completes what science doesn't truly entirely manage to fulfill. And this is where the investigation has gone so far. Hopefully there will be more interesting results very soon, but the amount of work is massive. I'm talking about 43, 44 adaptations. So hopefully more results will be available pretty soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victor Huertas, for your very interesting presentation. I'm sure we'll have questions on our chat, or even from our speakers. Please, you're very welcome to ask any questions, Juan Antonio Maya. Right.
I don't have any question. I think, are you asking us if we have any question?
There's a question from
somebody
well,
else.
just a comment from Metka. The notion of perspective. I don't know if you would like to.
Yeah. You want me to elaborate on that, or
elaborate on that? The notion that sci-fi does not predict the future, says Metka Tsupansik. I don't know if you would like to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. Science fiction doesn't predict the future, and a bit on perspective. You want a bit of perspective, a bit of elaboration on perspective. Fine, yeah. Yes, I agree. Science fiction doesn't predict the future, but for a time, criticism, and especially popular criticism, and to a point, academic criticism on science fiction has, for a time, until the 1960s, maybe, or 1970s. I'm not very sure about the dates, but I wouldn't wish to be inaccurate. But there has been the impression that science fiction has as a function to predict what the future is going to be like, in terms of technology, in terms of politics, in terms of science. I know this is not accurate, but this is pretty much what Fernando Ángel Moreno's claim was when he proposed this methodology to analyze science fiction works. Not only because of the future element, also because the scholar, and I think I agree with him, most of the scholarship focus pretty much on paradigmatic elements, on whether there are spacecrafts, whether there are Martians, whether there are robots, whether there are specific narratives or specific very, very concrete elements which do not entirely speak about the theoretical element of science fiction. Of course, there have been other examples, such as the concept of the novum, which was, of course, one of the most interesting innovations in the science fiction field. But what the term perspective intends to do in this regard, just to of course, I'm simplifying a bit just to make sure that I get to the argument of perspective. Perspective is proposed as a much more accurate term for science fiction, because science, the word science is the problem, isn't it? Because in the end, what seems to be the problem with the terminology is that science talks specifically about rational knowledge, whereas in the end, what we understand as science fiction would maybe have more to do with a philosophical formulation, or with a philosophical proposition to hypothesize about what the future is going to be like, without necessarily that meaning that this proposition on the future intends to be an accurate hypothesis, what it intends to be. First of all, entertainment, and then it intends to be a hypothesis, which means basically a what if exercise, but not necessarily something which intends to be final about that. So that's why the term prospective seems to be a much wider concept than science fiction, because in the end they fulfill the same purposes, but we do not need to necessarily stress the element of science so much. And then of course science is included in perspective. It is important to, well, in the end it's inevitable to use science, but or to think of science, but the idea would be to say that science would be a paradigmatic term which maybe could be transcended and approached in a more philosophical way, more than science fiction as a specific genre. And personally, to research on Shakespeare, The Tempest, the term prospective seems more useful for me, because it allows me to engage in a discussion with Thomas More. I can situate The Tempest much better in its own context as a science fiction, well, as a perspective, as something which is not science fiction, because that would be making a big claim, which perhaps has to be examined with a pinch of salt. But it would allow me to think of The Tempest as a hypothesis, which is not a dystopia nor a utopia, but rather a discussion on what could be the future of mankind from now on. What are we going to do from now on? If you think about The Tempest, I don't know if you're familiar with The Tempest, but there are several moments in which hypotheses are proposed. The most important one, of course, is Prospero's renunciation to magic and return to the world which he abandoned, with the political implications that this has. But there is a famous section in which Gonzalo, one of the noblemen from Naples, thinks of this island where the noblemen find themselves as a place where a new economic system could be started. An economic system without private property, without slaves, without workers, without work, basically. So thinking of perspective would be more useful to me, because this element of which is very typical in science fiction and frequent in utopian writings and utopian narratives, from the ancient times to Shakespeare's times, I think the perspective would be an interesting term to agglutinate all those ideas under a specific direction.
Thank you, Victor. Well, I have another couple of comments, but I will read them out. But maybe we might discuss them at the end of this session, because I would like to make sure that Maya has her time to give her presentation. So Christina Doku says that actually science fiction has predicted the future. Jules Verne predicted space travel and submarines. Star Trek predicted smartphones. And she adds, and science is a trope that helps maintain what Aristotle called plausible impossibility in fiction. So these are some reflections for later on, if we have time. So thank you again, Victor, and thank you. I always forget to thank all our participants. So thank you, Christina, Doku, Metka Zupančič, for your comments and questions. Let us move on to Maya Zalbidea Paniagua. Maya Zalbidea is an associate professor at the Complutense University of Madrid. Her main areas of research are electronic literature and feminist studies. She is a member of SEAM research group and has taken part in myth criticism projects Asis Galatea and Aglaya. So it's all yours, Maya.
Right. In this paper, I'm going to explain how the boundaries between humans and machines can be blurred in cyber literature, and the works I'm going to analyze would be considered within the post-cyberpunk philosophy. Due to the fact of their positive view of using machines for creativity, and paradoxically, they invite cyber readers to become more post-human, as well as more human. In a sense, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, Maya, but I think you didn't share your screen. Would you like to share?
I will share it later.
Okay, fine.
Thank
so
you.
I think, Victor, I think you have to remove yours first.
Yeah, I will.
Okay, thank you.
All right. This works invite cyber readers to become more posthuman, as well as more human in the sense of using literature to express one's feelings. In both works, I'm going to analyze the Sphinx and memory. The poet uses the machine to make poetry, and therefore the machine reproduces human characteristics such as creativity, inspiration, voice, and affects. According to William Winder, writing is an explicit device of creation. For Winder, I quote, "There is a fundamental link between language and robots." He finds that robots are instructions that make human form, and poets make experiments with poetry, like Swift's literary engine, the surrealist Cadaver Ski, Brian Williamson, and Barrow's cut-ups, etc. Winder has even given a name to the study of creative writing done by robots and has called it robotic poetics. Deliberately or not, cyber literature authors use robotic poetics using machines to make poetry. In cyberspace and electronic literature, the reader and writer become post-human. Machines become writers, and writers can become machines. The term post-human is regarded positively by Catherine Hales in How We Became Post-Human. From her view, human can be a distributed cognitive system, where part of the intelligence lies in the human brain, part in intelligent machines, and part in the interface between them. Catherine Hales explains in How We Became Posthuman that it seems to be difficult to try to guess if we are talking to a person or a machine in the famous Turing test. When an individual uses a computer and cannot see the recipient, the task is to pose questions that can distinguish verbal performance from embodied reality. When one cannot distinguish the intelligent machine from the intelligent human, there is some evidence that, to some extent, machines can think. The distinction of woman, man, human, and machine is blurred in the use of the new technologies. As Donna Haraway affirms, the cyber suggests the possibility of moving beyond the old limits of male and female into a new world of human, machine, and animals. Haraway used the metaphor of the cyber as a means of understanding and navigating one's place in a rapidly ever-changing techno-scientific world, as well as challenging what it means to be human. I have chosen the word cyborgs in my conference because even if the protagonists are robots or have robotic voices in the hypermedia I'm going to analyze, I would like to emphasize the importance of the writer becoming a cyborg because of the hybridization during technology. In the selected works, The Sphinx and Memory, the poet uses the machine to make poetry, and therefore the machine reproduces human characteristics, such as creativity, inspiration, voice, and affects. In both works, we find interconnections between mythologies and science. In this conference, I'm going to do two comparative analyses. One of the net artwork, The Sphinx by Dora Garcia, with a female Sphinx in Thebes of Greek mythology, and another of Machine Libertines, Memory with Talos, the first robot in Greek mythology. And now I'm going to share my screen. And I would like to show you The Sphinx by Dora Garcia.
Hello, I am the Sphinx, a game about truth. I will present you a set of questions to answer with yes or no. Are you ready to play? Are you in love?
All right, I would like to try again.
Hello, I am the Sphinx, a game about truth. I will present you a set of questions to answer with yes or no. Are you ready to play?
In this work, The Sphinx is a game in which a woman robot voice asks questions and the reader can only answer yes or no. The questions are about love relationships, gender issues, and society. Its correct answer gives, wait a second, please. I would like to stop sharing now. Wait a second, Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. Here in this work, we have each correct answer allows continuing the game. An incorrect answer finishes the game. The correction or error of the answers doesn't need to correspond to any kind of science of truth, but simply with an identity that corresponds with the way of being and thinking of Dora Garcia. The multimedia work starts with a female robotic voice saying, "Hello, I am the Sphinx, a game about the truth." She asks the user, "Are you in love? Can love be controlled by moral or reason? Do men feel differently than women? Are there still illogic prejudices and cliches about the role of women in society? Do you like your life?" The only way to continue playing is by memorizing the answers like in a video game. But answers may change while we are playing. The multimedia project is clearly feminist as it defies users' view of gender roles. The Sphinx by Dora Garcia started as an art exhibition in Patio Herreriano at Museo del Arte Contemporáneo Español. The original art exhibition was entitled Luz Intolerable y la Esfinge, and it is there where the work game was carried out. The Sphinx, a game about the truth. In a similar way as the performance of the museum, in the online game, the Sphinx asked questions. Some of them were transcendental, while others were frivolous. There was a correspondence between the author and the game players through chat messenger in 2005. The net art work remains in the website to be played in order to reflect on our reflections on gender issues and how we have received gender beliefs from mythologies, ideologies, and mass media. And I'm going to compare Dora Garcia's Sphinx with a female Sphinx in Thebes from Greek mythology. The mythological figure of the Sphinx historically appeared in Egypt in the first place. However, I've chosen to do my comparative analysis with the Greek Sphinx instead of the Egyptian one because Dora Garcia's Sphinx shares characteristics with the latter. In ancient Egypt, I quote Pinch, "Sphinxes embody the power and duty of the ruler." End of quotation. As Geraldine Pinch explains, they had the face of a male or female pharaoh. In Sear's words, I quote, "In Thebes, the female Sphinx is seated on a column or a rocky promontory, propounding a riddle to the gathered inhabitants of the city who vainly attempt to solve the mystery." End of quotation by Sear. In Dora Garcia's multimedia work, the female Sphinx has a robotic voice representing her static nature, like a statue who doesn't show any emotions and destroys the users with the sentence, "Game over." Like the Sphinx in Greek mythology, who connoted a destructive behavior and killed those who could not solve her riddle. Like Oedipus, the users must find the right answer. And now I would like to share the second work I'm going to analyze. Which is Memory by the collective Machine Liberty. Machine Libertine is composed by two Russian media artists, Taras Mastaler, an independent artist, and Natalia Fedorova from St. Petersburg State University. Here there is a description of their artistic innovations. I quote, "The method of our work is the exploration of the role of media in the development of literary art practices, including video poetry, text generators, and performance art. The main principles of the group are formulated in our Machine Poetry Manifesto, pointing out the idea of liberation of the machines from the routine tasks and increasing the intensity of their use for creative and educational practices." End of quotation. I'm going to read extracts chosen from their manifesto in order to introduce their philosophy so that their video poem can be more clearly understood. Machine Libertine's Manifesto. Our aim is to liberate machines from servitude and give them their own voice. Human language lost its power, and only words generated by the machines can make sense. While machines developed with us, they became the true mirror that we hold to ourselves. In their mechanic voice, they will explain us who we are. Asimo Robot, in memory, tries to imitate human movements and emotions, as we have seen in the video poem. When he recites poetry, a female voice, which is Natalia Fedorova's voice, appears, and he becomes a female and male hybrid. She uses mathematical language to imitate computer's language. The letters, as you have seen, are numbers. And this robot imitates the movements and looks at himself at the end of the video in a mirror. I would like to quote Adrienne Meyers from the Greek myth of Talos, the first robot, to compare this robot with the first robot that in Greek mythology Hephaestus created. Even, I start quoting Adrienne Meyers, even 2,500 years ago, Greeks had already begun to investigate the uncertain line between human and machine. And like many modern myths about artificial intelligence, Talos' tale is as much about his robotic heart as it is about his robotic brain. Illustrating the demise of Talos on a vase of the 5th century, one painter captured the dying automaton's despair with a tear rolling down his bronze cheek. End of quotation. The Asimo robot we have watched in the video poem, who was the humanoid robot, he or she looks at herself in the mirror, showing that she has self-awareness and also narcissism, human characteristics. She's aware of the fact that she's a human artifact, and this is why she looks at herself in a mirror that at the same time is a canvas, because it is an artistic work of a human being. And as a machine created by a human being acquires human characteristics, like reciting poetry. When the robot says ice cream means April, theater, etc. In memory, like in Greek mythology, the robot tries to warn humans that if they destroy their own creations, they will destroy the world. Talos' robot feels pain just like the robot in memory, who questions her own situation. To conclude, robots and cyborgs in fiction have been used since ancient times to show how arrogance in humans in their working life can make them forget about values and exploit other human beings. Becoming posthuman does not exclusively mean destruction and a struggle to survive, as it was shown in 70s and 80s urban cyberpunk narratives.
some works of cyber literature show the importance of preserving human sensitivity to keep on evolving and creating poetical productions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maya, for your presentation. I'm sure we'll have some questions or comments. Our panelists are also very welcome to make any comments or questions, Juan Antonio or Victor Huertas.
I've got a comment on the something someone said on Jules Verne. I think it's Christina Doku.
Okay, sorry, Victor, to interrupt. We have we have a question now from Christina Doku, who asks Maya that given that we program those robots to be human in their emotions, isn't that a way of allaying our own fears about the machines surpassing and dominating the human race?
Could you develop the question? Do you mean that we create these machines to show how we, okay, to show our, I think that I understand the question, to show our own fears of dominating the machines. Could you develop the question, because I don't really understand?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Christina, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, the thing is, we create those machines to be simulations, those robots rather, to be simulations of ourselves. They're not exactly cyborgs in the sense that they're not techno-organic yet. But Asimov, for example, or those algorithms that are used as assistants on the internet, they are created human-like to resemble us, so that they create a kind of comfort in our interactions with them. So I was wondering whether, since we are the ones controlling really this outpour of emotions, and it's not the machine's own choice to be emotional or not, isn't that a way for us to just simply say that we can keep the machines anthropomorphic and in a sense more controllable by us, still on a level or in a reality where we can control them, where we can still have some sense of affinity with them, as opposed to, let's say, the Matrix, where the machines take over? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remark. In fact, in these works, in Machine Libertines Collective, they defend the idea of liberating the machines, like feeling that we always think that we can dominate machines, and it is a way to show our superiority, like we can do with, like humans do with animals or with people, and in slavery, and even in working, and as we see in everyday life. And I think that these works criticize that the way that we think that we can manipulate them. And in science fiction, we see how this kind of machines and robots, they make a revolution to show that that if we manipulate or dominate others, they will take revenge one day. So it's not the best idea to do it. And of course, they are not cyborgs, they are robots. But in my conference, I've chosen the word cyber because I'm interested not only in the fiction, but also in the interaction of the cyber author, because the author is a cyber, because the author is the real person, and at the same time the character, the speaker, the voice that we hear, and also the readers. We are reading the fiction, and we are interacting with it using the machine. So we become hybrid when experiencing these works.
Thank you, Maya. There's and Christina for your question. There's another question from Leon Burnett, who asked, who comments, your paper referred to the cybernetic use of human language. Is there a difference between the written word and the spoken language in this respect? Or to ask the question differently, what is the significance of voice?
Very interesting question. Thank you so much. I need to think it over a little bit. When you mean there is a difference between written word and spoken language, do you mean is there is a difference in memory? Are you specifying in this multimedia work, or are you talking generally about the written word and the spoken language? Are you talking generally, or?
I had in mind the paper I gave on Galatea 2.2 by Richard Powers, where the machine architecture only spoke, and by speaking acquired the characteristics of the human, such as intelligence and emotion. And in the novel, there's no real reference to the machine, cybernetic machine, writing. Whereas, of course, the novel itself is a written form. So there's an interesting interplay between the spoken and the written word in that work. And I just wondered whether in your research, the difference between the two had a significance.
Yes, I think they have a significance, because in the they correspond to different dimensions, because the written word appears like in other multimedia works. It appears and the reader is reading the text, and also in another dimension there are two voices speaking at the same time. And on the one hand, the text was produced by one author, who is Natalia Fedorova, and on the other hand, the video is made by a different artist, who is Taras. So there are different dimensions: the voice, the text, and also the text that we perceive when we are watching. So I think that they have a different meaning. There is a difference between them, because they come from different circumstances.
Yes, I was also thinking about the kind of mythic significance, because of course, I mean, without getting too deeply into it, myth is usually considered to originate from oral discourse, and only later it becomes written down in versions of the myth.
Excuse me, I couldn't hear the last part you said.
That usually myth is seen as originating as an oral form,
Yes.
and then we have written forms which kind of solidify the myth and give us particular versions, whereas myth originally, as you know, had no author except for the people.
Interesting. Yes, really interesting. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think that the significance of voice I think that the voice also has some can use a different can create a different reality, and the voice also shows an identity and also an experience in stories, in oral stories. The storytellers change, they had their own version, and so I think that there is a difference definitely between the written word and the spoken language, because there is always a different, it can be a different idea and it can be a different story because of what we hear, because of the tone, because of the voice. It changes a lot, and it's not the same story, because the written story, we cannot there's a lot of information that we cannot perceive, but when we are hearing a voice, the voice provides a performance.
Thank you.
I would like to, if nobody else has a question or comment, I would like to comment on Victor Huerta's interesting remark on Miranda's as a dead person. Where have you found this information? Is it your own interpretation? Because it reminded me when I read Shakespeare's play that she was like a magical character almost, and it's so interesting because also we have the other character who was like heir to, who was like, what's the name? Do you remember?
Ariel.
Yes,
Ariel.
that's it. So this is really interesting. Could you explain where have you found this information? Is it your interpretation? Do you find any connection with these two characters who seem to be like intangible, magical, or come from a different world?
Well, what is interesting about Miranda is that by her own, well, she's got this aura, which is already quite established in the character's reception, isn't it? She's got this uncanny feeling. She's an adolescent. She's a teenage girl, which in many respects behaves with independence and the willfulness of an adolescent who wants to know everything which her father wants her not to know. She wants to know, but then of course the father wants her to know that because he wants her to be in the back to the normal world as soon as possible. That he wants to orchestrate and theatricalize this encounter with Ferdinand and so on and so forth. And this interpretation of Miranda as a dead person, it comes from Scott Massiano, and I can send the material to you if you're interested. I've got it in PDF actually, so it's an interpretation, very recent one, and if you, I don't know if you're very familiar with the play, but in the first scene, Act 1, Scene 2, Prospero explains to her how they went to the island, and she says, "Father, didn't I have mistresses and ladies and maids serving me at some point? I remember that as in a dream." How could she ever possibly remember that as a dream if she's only about 18 years of age? How could it be so distant in time? Yeah, maybe she was a baby, but she had maids serving her, taking care of her. It doesn't make any sense. She would remember that. So the hypothesis is that Prospero has found her daughter dead. Maybe en route to the island. Maybe on the voyage to the island, she probably died of a fever or because she couldn't resist the weather or whatever, and because of his magical powers, he revived her. He says, actually, I have raised the dead. He says that in this speech, which is a crucial speech because the renunciation to magic, the one in which he concludes, I will drown my book. which very often looks silly, isn't it? Because the actors very often go back to this idea of Prospero as a magician, as a sorcerer. And then, of course, you imagine the wizard with a hat, with the stars, with a magic wand, and then it becomes ridiculous. But of course, if you approach it with this seriousness, I have raised the dead, you know. What is not shown in the play is which dead have been raised by Prospero. So Marciano, by elimination, basically says Miranda, because she's the only one who doesn't remember where she comes from. And there are other evidences. Of course, he manipulates her very much in many regards. We do not know if she likes Ferdinand because she likes Ferdinand, or because she's somehow guided to like Ferdinand. It is a bit too rush how she makes the decision, and on stage it looks quite forced in many respects. She looks like an entranced character most of the time. So, and sometimes she's entranced. When he decides, she goes to sleep again, isn't it? After this account on how they came to the island, he says, "Okay, now go to sleep, my dear child," and he makes her sleep. So she's manipulated extremely all the time, isn't it? So to which extent isn't Miranda a kind of pre-creature of Frankenstein, or pre-Frankenstein creature, or wretch? And we could consider her as a kind of revived or reanimated person. That is a hypothesis which is very, very interesting. But it comes mostly from the reading of the first scene and the reading of the "I will drown my book" speech, which I think now takes a different quality, isn't it? Reading the speech in this way, because why would Prospero renounce magic? Why would he renounce anything, were it not because something extremely potent and strong happened in this experimentation? I mean, I think the play doesn't sufficiently explain why he needs to renounce magic. Why not just use it responsibly? But he renounces it. So I suppose that interpretation adds more depth and dramatic power to the whole story.
I would like to ask also Juan Antonio about Shira, if has it received any kind of criticism of censorship by any conservative publishers or organizations, because it's been addressed to young readers and using the topic of lesbianism.
Correct. On a level of let's say intellectual criticism, you know, experts who have, or critics who have seen the animated series, it has received good and very good reviews, right? Okay, but obviously, and there is always a section of American society who opposes any kind of progress and advancement, you know, on the treatment of these issues, right? And obviously, from that side, it has had attacks, you know, bad reviews and so on, you know. But as a whole, it has been very well received, you know, both by the public and by the special press specialists, you know, and critics. And since I am talking, I would also like to congratulate Victor and Maya on their presentations. You know, they are specialists in their fields. You know, Maya in electronic literature, Victor in Shakespeare. You know, and it really shows when they talk about, you know, anything related to their fields. You know. And just a question for Victor, you know, I'm just curious, you know, you've read many adaptations of The Tempest and so on. I haven't had the chance to read Santiago Garcia and Javier Peinado's adaptation, right? Now, how would you rank, this version, as compared to others? Would you say that it's a good adaptation? It's quite good, or it's a very good adaptation? Excellent.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Professionally speaking, I wouldn't say there is a good or an excellent or a top adaptation, but I would say it's fairly competent in the sense that it completely radically challenges the premises of the source. It doesn't really. It's very ideologically positioned, radically positioned in an anti-capitalist premise, which is not very Shakespearean in this regard. Shakespeare would have tried to be more social democratic, if you want to use the expression, just to use some alternative term. But Javier Peinado and Santiago Garcia do not forgive anyone. In the whole mankind is to be destroyed. Not only Prospero, also Miranda and Ferdinand, who are going to be let's say the minions of these hypocrites, who are Prospero, his brother, the Prospero and Sebastian and Antonio quarrel because they have been part of a project which has ended up creating the atomic bomb, and the problem is that Antonio has mismanaged or misused this atomic bomb, this discovery, and Prospero regrets how this happens, or regrets what happened. There is this Ariel character who is a computer, inspired in HAL, in 2001: Space Odyssey. So what I like of this adaptation is how it borrows ideas from different science fiction works, such as Arthur Clarke's novel, and then it uses them to support and refurbish Shakespeare's narrative. And of course, the challenge of The Tempest by Santiago Garcia and Javier Peinado is, how could we reread The Tempest, Shakespeare's The Tempest, from this perspective, from a radical way. And what is interesting about this is that Shakespeareans would often find in this adaptation very interesting angles to explore the elements which surround The Tempest. And of course, there are many elements, because if you think about The Tempest, it was created in a time of crisis. It was a critical period. A civil war was just about to begin in England at this time. A socio-economic crisis was about to begin also. The common lands, the lands of the commons, have been redistributed and given to the lords and to the emerging capitalist entrepreneurs of the period. So it is not inappropriate to think of The Tempest as a play or as a text applied to the neoliberal age. But of course, the values and the ideas which applied in the 17th century wouldn't apply exactly here. So I would say that in a way they have been Shakespearean, in the sense that they have really taken into account the local element and used the discourses of the period to propose an alternative discourse. But it is. I think it is a bit. I think what I find in this comic book, interesting as it is that perhaps it is a bit negative and a bit too pessimistic. But that's fair. I mean, it's fine. You can be pessimistic. There are many other adaptations which are more optimistic and more ambivalent. So it doesn't hurt. It's fine. But I think it's enjoyable. I enjoyed reading it very much. It's a very interesting work.
Right, thank you all for your comments, questions, but unfortunately our session has come to an end. Yes, Victor.
Yes, sorry, I got a response for Antonia. Is that her name, or somebody who asked me about Jules Verne and about whether science fiction predicted the future, or she said that science fiction predicts the future, but it predicts the future sometimes, but I think it generally doesn't, isn't it? And especially the last works of the last, let's say, well, you don't need to go as far as that. We could think about 1984 by George Orwell. It hasn't really predicted what happened in 1984. In 1984, we were in the middle of the Thatcher period, so we didn't really have a socialist state controlling everyone in the 1980s. We pretty much had the opposite of what was predicted by Orwell. Back to the Future supposedly presented a different time and a different way of a different relationship with technology, which hasn't really happened in 2020, isn't it? And the same applies to uchronic narratives, which are supposed to be science fiction, but by definition, uchronic narratives do not predict the future. They rewrite the past and propose alternatives. So I wouldn't say that necessarily predicting scientific developments is what, or being accurate in the prediction is what I would say that Jules Verne and other works which predicted things maybe did so because these scientific discussions were taking place at the time, and then it was predictable to think that this would happen. But I wouldn't say it is the ontology of science fiction to predict and be accurate on what the scientific development would be. And I don't think that not hitting on the nail is a problem, in the sense that I wouldn't say that 1984 is not an excellent novel just because it didn't happen. That's it. Sorry.
Right. All right. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you also to our participants. We'll have more tomorrow and on Friday, so I hope to see you then. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. See you.
Bye.